I thought being a military wife meant sacrificing your voice for someone else's career, your dreams for someone else's mission, your worth for someone else's approval. I was wrong. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who's been quietly building a life of purpose while others measure success by paychecks and corner offices. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mountain air in Colorado Springs carried a crisp bite that November evening as I adjusted my maternity dress for the third time in the mirror. 5 months pregnant with our first child, I was finally showing enough that strangers would smile knowingly at my rounded belly instead of wondering if I'd simply indulged too much at dinner. The dress was navy blue, conservative enough for a military wife but elegant enough for the upscale venue where my brother Ryan was celebrating his latest promotion at the tech company. David had pressed his dress uniform earlier, the sharp creases and polished buttons reflecting his 15 years of disciplined service. As a colonel in the Air Force, he commanded respect wherever he went, but tonight we were entering civilian territory where his rank meant less than Ryan's salary and stock options. The Broadmoor Resort sprawled against the backdrop of Cheyenne Mountain like something from a postcard, all stone facades and manicured gardens that whispered of old money and established success. Ryan had chosen the venue deliberately, I suspected the same way he chose everything else in his life to make a statement about his achievements. The valet took our modest sedan between a Tesla and a BMW, and I caught David's slight smile at the pretension of it all. He'd grown up in a working-class family in Ohio where a night at Applebee's was a celebration, and even after years of military leadership, he remained unimpressed by displays of wealth that prioritized image over substance. Inside the private dining room, 30 people mingled with champagne glasses and carefully curated conversations about market trends and vacation homes. My parents, Linda and Robert Carter, held court near the bar, my mother's real estate success evident in her designer suit and my father's legal career reflected in his easy confidence among the other professionals. They spotted us immediately, my mother's eyes doing that quick assessment she'd perfected over my 26 years of disappointing her expectations. Military wife, pregnant at 26, husband who'd likely never make the kind of money that bought houses in Monument or vacations in Tuscany. Filed away for later commentary, as always. Ryan stood near the windows overlooking the resort's lake, his wife Amanda beside him in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. At 29, Ryan had achieved everything our parents had dreamed of for their children. Software engineering degree from Colorado University, rapid promotions at a Denver tech firm, a house with mountain views and a 3-car garage. He was the golden child who'd followed the prescribed path to success, while I was the daughter who'd married a soldier and chosen a life of modest means and frequent relocations. David's hand found the small of my back as we navigated through the crowd, a gesture both protective and reassuring. At 32, he carried himself with the quiet authority that came from leading men and women in life or death situations, making decisions that affected hundreds of lives, earning respect through competence rather than compensation. His presence always calmed me, even in situations like this where I felt perpetually out of place among my own family. My mother reached us first, air-kissing my cheeks with the practiced enthusiasm she reserved for public displays of affection. "Sarah, darling, you're glowing. Pregnancy suits you." Her voice carried just enough volume to announce our arrival to nearby conversations. "And David, so handsome in uniform. You two make such a lovely couple." The compliments felt hollow, delivered with the same tone she might use to praise a nice centerpiece or decent wine selection. "Thank you, Mrs. Carter," David replied with military politeness, though I knew he'd asked her dozens of times to call him David or even Colonel Mitchell if she preferred formality. She insisted on maintaining the distance of his rank and my maiden name, a subtle reminder that in her world he was still an outsider who'd stolen her daughter from better prospects. Ryan approached with Amanda, his smile wide and confident in the way that came from never doubting your place in any room. "Look what the wind blew in," he said, embracing me briefly before stepping back to assess my appearance. "Getting bigger every day, aren't you? How far along now?" The question sounded casual enough, but I detected the undercurrent of judgment that had colored our interactions since I'd married David 5 years ago. 5 months, I replied, instinctively placing my hand on my bump, due in April. "April babies are supposed to be stubborn," Amanda chimed in with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Though I suppose with military genetics, this little one will be taking orders from day one." She'd never forgiven me for not choosing the sorority sister path she'd mapped out for us in college, the one that led to marrying men like Ryan who could provide the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to expecting. David's expression remained neutral, but I felt the slight tension in his posture. 5 years of marriage had taught me to read his subtle reactions to the condescension we often faced at family gatherings. He'd grown up respecting service and sacrifice, values that seemed increasingly foreign to my family's social circle where success was measured in square footage and vacation destinations. The cocktail hour stretched on with predictable conversations about market volatility in school districts, renovations, and restaurant recommendations. I found myself nodding along to discussions about things I'd never afford, places I'd never live, priorities I'd never understood. Military families learned to find contentment in temporary housing and modest budgets, in friendships that transcended geography and achievements that couldn't be displayed on social media. When the dinner bell chimed, we filed into the adjoining dining room, where round tables draped in white linens awaited. I wasn't surprised to find David and me seated at a table near the back, alongside Ryan's college friends and their spouses, while my parents and the honored guests occupied the premium spots closer to the head table. The seating arrangement spoke volumes about our perceived importance in Ryan's celebration, a subtle hierarchy that placed military service somewhere below tech industry success. The meal progressed through courses I couldn't fully enjoy due to pregnancy-related nausea and anxiety about the evening ahead. David made polite conversation with the others at our table, discussing deployment schedules and base assignments with the patience of someone accustomed to explaining military life to civilians, who viewed it as romantically heroic or tragically limiting. I picked at my salmon and tried to ignore the growing discomfort in my lower back, a reminder that pregnancy wasn't the glowing experience magazines portrayed, especially when combined with stress and uncomfortable shoes. As dessert plates were cleared and coffee was served, Ryan stood and tapped his knife against his wine glass. The room fell silent.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Immediately, phones emerging to capture what would undoubtedly become social media content celebrating his achievement. My brother had always possessed natural charisma, the ability to command attention and deliver memorable speeches that left audiences impressed with his wit and confidence. "Thank you all for sharing this special evening with Amanda and me," he began, his voice carrying easily through the room. "When I started at Innovate Solutions 5 years ago, I never imagined I'd be standing here tonight as the youngest senior VP in the company's history." Applause rippled through the crowd, genuine appreciation from friends and family who'd watched his rapid ascent through the corporate ranks. He spoke eloquently about hard work and vision, about the team he'd built and the projects he'd led to success. He thanked his mentors and colleagues, his parents for their support and guidance, Amanda for her partnership in building their life together. It was a gracious speech that highlighted his achievements without excessive boasting, the kind of presentation that would make any family proud. Then his gaze found our table, and something in his expression shifted. "I also want to acknowledge my little sister Sarah, who's here tonight with her husband David." The spotlight of attention swung toward us, and I felt my cheeks warm under the scrutiny of 30 sets of eyes. Sarah has always been the free spirit in our family, choosing paths that might not make sense to the rest of us, but somehow work for her. The laughter that followed was indulgent, the kind reserved for endearing eccentrics who provide entertainment value at family gatherings. I maintained my smile, though my stomach tightened with familiar dread about where this acknowledgement might lead. "While some of us climb corporate ladders and build careers," Ryan continued, gesturing toward the room full of professionals, "Sarah chose to marry into the military and embrace that lifestyle. And now she's about to add military mom to her resume." More chuckles from the audience, as if my life choices were amusing quirks rather than deliberate decisions. I have to admit, when she first told us about David, we weren't sure what to think. A career soldier, someone who'd never make real money or provide stability. But hey, he raised his glass with a grin, at least she'll never have to worry about him having a midlife crisis and buying a sports car. The military budget doesn't allow for that kind of luxury. The room erupted in laughter while I sat frozen, my face burning with humiliation and anger. Ryan's speech had transformed from celebration to roast, using my marriage and pregnancy as punchlines for his audience's entertainment. The worst part wasn't just the mockery, but the way everyone in the room, including my parents, seemed to find it genuinely funny rather than cruel. To Sarah and David, Ryan concluded, raising his glass higher, may their military discount stretch far enough to cover diapers and college tuition. We love you guys, even if we don't always understand your choices. The toast was accompanied by applause and laughter, people raising their glasses to join in what they perceived as good-natured family teasing rather than public humiliation. I lifted my water glass with a trembling hand, forcing my frozen smile to remain in place while inside I crumbled. This wasn't just casual ribbing between siblings. This was Ryan using his moment of triumph to diminish my life choices, to reduce my marriage to a financial miscalculation, and my pregnancy to an additional burden on an already strained budget. In front of 30 people, including my parents' friends and business associates, he'd painted me as the family member who'd settled for less and was about to compound that mistake with a baby. David's jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly, the only outward sign of his reaction to Ryan's speech. But I knew him well enough to recognize the stillness that came over him when he was processing something deeply offensive while calculating the appropriate response. He'd faced down enemy combatants and natural disasters, led rescue missions and training exercises, but this kind of personal attack in a social setting required different skills than military leadership provided. What happened next would replay in my mind for months afterward, a moment that shifted not just the evening's trajectory, but my understanding of my own worth and my husband's protective instincts. David stood slowly, his movement deliberate and unmistakable in its authority. The room's attention shifted toward him, conversations dying mid-sentence as people recognized the presence of someone accustomed to being heard when he chose to speak. His dress uniform, which had seemed almost out of place among the business suits and cocktail dresses, suddenly commanded the respect and attention that civilian success could never quite achieve. I'd like to add something, if I may, David said, his voice carrying the clear confidence of someone who'd briefed generals and addressed troops before dangerous missions. The room fell completely silent, sensing that whatever came next would be significant. Ryan's expression shifted from triumphant satisfaction to uncertainty as David continued. When Ryan mentioned that Sarah chose to marry into the military, I think there might be some misunderstanding about what that choice actually represents. His tone remained respectful, but carried an undercurrent of authority that made everyone in the room pay attention. Military families don't choose careers for financial gain or social status. We choose service. Sarah didn't marry a paycheck or a lifestyle. She married someone committed to defending the freedoms that allow entrepreneurs like Ryan to build successful companies in a stable, secure environment. David's gaze swept the room, taking in faces that were beginning to reassess their understanding of his profession and our choices. What Ryan didn't mention is that Sarah has spent the last 5 years managing household relocations across 3 states, supporting deployment separations, and building community connections that help other military families navigate the challenges of service life. She's volunteered hundreds of hours at base family readiness groups, organized care packages for deployed troops, and mentored young military wives who are learning to handle responsibilities that most people never face. The room's energy had shifted completely. People who'd been chuckling at Ryan's jokes were now listening intently to David's measured words, recognizing a different perspective on the life they'd just heard, dismissed as settled dreams and financial limitation. As for stability, David continued, I've served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and humanitarian missions in 3 countries. I've managed logistics for operations involving thousands of personnel and millions of dollars in equipment. My security clearance reflects the trust our government places in my judgment and integrity. Military service provides different kinds of stability than corporate careers, but stability nonetheless. He turned slightly toward our table, his expression softening as he looked at me. Sarah is about to become the mother of a child who will grow up understanding service, sacrifice, and the value of contributing to something larger than personal achievement. That child will learn leadership, integrity, and global awareness from both parents who've chosen purpose over profit. The silence in the room was profound, a complete reversal from the laughter that had followed Ryan's toast. David hadn't raised his voice or shown anger, but his words carried the weight of experience and conviction that transformed the evening's narrative. So yes, David concluded, raising his water glass, here's to Sarah, who chose a life of meaning over a life of accumulation. To her strength in supporting service, while building her own contributions to our community. And to our child, who will inherit values that no stock option or promotion can provide. The applause that followed was different from what Ryan had received. It was thoughtful, respectful, tinged with a recognition that they'd just witnessed something significant. People raised their glasses with genuine sincerity, rather than obligatory participation, acknowledging a perspective most had never considered. I felt tears threatening as I looked at my husband, this man who'd just defended not only me but the entire foundation of our life together. He'd taken Ryan's dismissive narrative and reframed it completely, showing our guests a different way to measure worth and success. In 5 minutes, David had accomplished something I'd been trying to do for years. He'd made my family see that different choices didn't necessarily mean lesser choices. Ryan remained standing, his expression a complex mixture of surprise, embarrassment, and what might have been newfound respect. Amanda sat silent beside him, perhaps realizing that her husband's moment of triumph had been overshadowed by a perspective she'd never fully considered. My parents exchanged glances across the room, clearly reassessing their son-in-law and daughter in light of information they'd never bothered to seek. As David settled back into his chair, he placed his hand over mine, with the same steady strength that had guided me through 5 years of military life. The gesture was protective and reassuring, but also celebratory. For the first time in our marriage, I felt fully seen and valued by my family, not despite our choices, but because someone had finally explained those choices in terms they could understand and respect. The drive home from the Broadmoor passed in contemplative silence, the mountain roads winding through darkness, punctuated only by our headlights, and the occasional glow of other vehicles heading back toward Colorado Springs. David's hands remained steady on the wheel, his profile calm in the dashboard light, but I could sense the controlled energy that always followed moments when he'd been forced to assert his authority in civilian settings. He preferred leading by example rather than explanation, letting his actions speak for themselves rather than defending his choices to people who measured success in quarterly earnings and property values. I pressed my hand against my belly, feeling our baby move restlessly as if responding to the evening's emotional turbulence. Throughout the pregnancy, I'd noticed how our child seemed to react to stress and excitement, tiny kicks and shifts that reminded me this little person was already part of our experiences, already being shaped by the world we were creating together. Tonight felt like a turning point, a moment when our family's narrative had been rewritten by someone who understood its true value. "Thank you," I said quietly as we turned onto the road leading to Peterson Air Force Base, the familiar sight of the entrance gate ahead promising the return to our world where different values prevailed. David glanced at me briefly before returning his attention to the road. "You don't need to thank me for telling the truth, Sarah. What Ryan did tonight wasn't just disrespectful to you, it was ignorant about what military families sacrifice and contribute." His voice carried the measured tone he used when discussing serious matters, devoid of emotion but weighted with conviction. The base housing on Falcon Drive looked modest compared to the grandeur of the Broadmoor, rows of identical units that prioritized function over form, community over status. But as David pulled into our driveway, and I saw the American flag hanging from our front porch, I felt a sense of belonging that no amount of designer furniture or mountain views could replicate. This was home not because of its size or cost, but because of what it represented, and who we'd chosen to become within its walls. Inside, David hung his uniform jacket carefully in the closet, while I slipped out of my heels and rubbed my swollen feet. The baby had been particularly active during dinner, responding to my stress with movements that bordered on acrobatic. I settled onto our couch, a piece we'd bought secondhand, but that had traveled with us through 3 assignments, and somehow felt more comfortable than any expensive furniture I'd encountered. "Do you think it made a difference?" I asked, watching David loosen his tie with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd worn uniforms for 15 years. "What you said tonight, do you think they actually heard it, or will they go back to thinking we're the family members who made poor choices?" David sat beside me, his presence immediately comforting in the way that only comes from years of shared challenges and mutual support. "Some of them heard it," he said thoughtfully. "Your father looked like he was reassessing everything he thought he knew about military service. A few of Ryan's friends seemed genuinely interested when I mentioned the global scope of what we do. But honestly, Sarah, it doesn't matter whether they understand or not. What matters is that you understand your own worth." He was right, of course, but years of family dynamics weren't easily overcome by a single evening's revelation. I'd spent so long trying to prove that my choices were valid, seeking approval from people who measured success by standards that had nothing to do with my actual values. Tonight had shown me something I'd been too close to see clearly. I'd been allowing other people's definitions of achievement to diminish my confidence in a life I'd chosen deliberately and built thoughtfully. My phone buzzed with a text message, the first of what would become a steady stream of communications over the following days. The message was from my college roommate Jennifer, who'd been at tonight's dinner with her husband Mark. "Sarah, I had no idea about everything you do as a military wife." David's speech was eye-opening. "Would love to catch up soon and hear more about your experiences." Within the hour, 3 more messages arrived. My father's business partner wanted to know more about military logistics and whether there might be consulting opportunities in the private sector. One of Amanda's sorority sisters asked about volunteer opportunities with military families, mentioning that she'd never considered how service members' spouses contributed to community resilience. Even my cousin Mike, who'd barely acknowledged me at family gatherings for years, sent a message saying David's words had given him new perspective on career choices and what really mattered in life. The response was gratifying, but also overwhelming. For years I'd felt invisible at family gatherings, the relative whose life choices seemed quaint or misguided compared to traditional professional success. Suddenly people wanted to understand what they'd been dismissing, to learn about experiences they'd never considered valuable. It was validating but also exhausting to realize how much effort I'd wasted trying to explain myself to people who hadn't been ready to listen. David emerged from the bathroom in his sleep clothes, looking more relaxed now that the formal evening was behind us. Military life had taught us both to compartmentalize, to process difficult situations, and then move forward, rather than dwelling on conflicts we couldn't control. But tonight felt different, like a watershed moment that would influence how we approached family relationships going forward. "I keep thinking about Ryan's face when you finished speaking," I said, shifting to make room for David on the couch. He looked almost shocked, like he'd never considered that there might be another way to interpret our choices. "Ryan's not malicious," David replied, settling beside me and pulling my feet into his lap for the foot massage that had become our evening ritual since my second trimester. "He's just narrow in his worldview. Success in tech requires focus on metrics and outcomes that can be quantified quickly. Military service operates on longer timelines with different measures of achievement. It's not surprising that he'd struggle to understand what we do or why we value it." The baby kicked hard against my ribs, as if responding to our conversation, and I pressed David's hand against my belly so he could feel the movement. His face softened in the way it always did when confronted with tangible evidence of our growing family, the wonder of new life, overriding any lingering frustration from the evening's confrontation. "This little one's going to grow up, knowing exactly who they are, and what they're worth," David said quietly, his hand moving gently across my bump. "They won't need approval from people who don't understand their values, because they'll be raised with confidence in those values." Over the following days, the ripple effects from that evening continued to unfold in unexpected ways. My mother called Tuesday afternoon, her voice carrying an unfamiliar note of uncertainty. "Sarah, honey, I've been thinking about what David said at Ryan's dinner. I realize I may not have fully appreciated what your life involves. Would you like to have lunch this week? I'd love to hear more about your volunteer work and what military families face." The conversation was stilted at first, decades of established patterns difficult to overcome in a single phone call. But gradually, my mother began asking genuine questions about deployment cycles and military culture, about the challenges of frequent relocations and the support systems that helped families navigate them. She seemed particularly interested in my work with the Family Readiness Group, the way we organized assistance for families dealing with deployment stress and emergency situations. "I had no idea you were essentially running a nonprofit organization," she admitted during our lunch at a quiet restaurant near the base. "When you talked about volunteer work, I pictured bake sales and casual activities. I didn't realize you were coordinating crisis response and family support services." Her newfound interest felt genuine, but also highlighted how little effort she'd made over the years to understand my actual contributions and responsibilities. I'd stopped sharing details about my activities because her responses had consistently minimized their importance, treating them as hobbies rather than meaningful work. Now faced with a different framework for understanding military life, she was discovering that her daughter's contributions had substance and impact she'd never recognized.
Wednesday brought an unexpected phone call from Ryan himself, his voice carrying none of the casual confidence that usually characterized our interactions. "Sarah, I owe you an apology," he began without preamble. "What I said at my dinner was inappropriate, and I've been thinking about it since David responded. I guess I never really understood what your life involves or why you chose it." The conversation that followed was perhaps the most honest we'd ever had as adults. Ryan admitted that he'd viewed my marriage to David as settling for less because he couldn't imagine choosing a career with financial limitations and geographical uncertainty. He'd interpreted my contentment with military life as evidence that I lacked ambition rather than recognition that I'd found fulfillment in different priorities. "Amanda and I have been talking," he continued, "and we realize we've been pretty narrow in how we think about success." David's speech made us both question whether our focus on career advancement and accumulating things has been missing something important. The admission was significant coming from Ryan, who'd spent his adult life pursuing exactly the kind of success our parents had taught us to value. He'd achieved everything on the traditional checklist of accomplishment, yet something about David's words had prompted him to question whether achievement and fulfillment were necessarily the same thing. Thursday's mail brought a surprise that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier, a formal letter from my father's law firm, written on official letterhead, but in my father's personal tone. He'd spent his career in corporate law, specializing in contracts and negotiations
that involved millions of dollars and complex international agreements. His letter explained that he'd been researching military logistics and procurement, discovering parallels between David's responsibilities and the corporate operations he managed for his clients. "I realize I've been guilty of assuming that military service was somehow less complex or demanding than civilian careers," he wrote. "After learning more about the scope of modern military operations, I'm embarrassed by my ignorance." David's responsibilities for personnel, equipment, and strategic planning exceed what most executives handle, yet he does it in life-or-death situations with national security implications. I would be honored to learn more about his work and whether my experience might be useful in any capacity. The letter represented a complete reversal from years of polite but dismissive interactions. My father had built his reputation on thorough analysis and strategic thinking, qualities that apparently led him to reassess his assumptions when presented with new information. His offer to contribute his expertise to military operations showed respect for David's profession that had been entirely absent from previous conversations. Friday afternoon brought perhaps the most surprising development of all. Amanda appeared at my front door without advance notice, her usual designer perfection replaced by casual clothes and an expression I'd never seen before, genuine vulnerability mixed with something that might have been admiration. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, glancing past me into our modest living room with its second-hand furniture and military memorabilia. "I was hoping we could talk about what David said, about military life, about choices I've never really understood." I invited her in, offering tea and settling into our small kitchen, where morning light streamed through windows that overlooked the base housing community. Amanda had never visited our home before, always preferring to meet at restaurants or public venues that didn't require her to confront the economic realities of military life. "I've been thinking about your pregnancy," she began hesitantly, "and about what it means to raise children with different values than what Ryan and I have been pursuing. We've been trying to have a baby for 2 years now, and every conversation about parenting focuses on private schools and college funds and providing material advantages." She paused, staring into her teacup before continuing. "But listening to David talk about service and sacrifice and contributing to something larger than yourself, I started wondering whether we're thinking about all the wrong things. What if raising successful children isn't about giving them every material advantage? What if it's about teaching them purpose and integrity and how to find meaning in their choices?" The conversation that followed lasted nearly 3 hours, covering everything from pregnancy fears to marriage dynamics to the challenge of defining success in a culture obsessed with accumulation. Amanda revealed insecurities I'd never suspected, admitting that despite her husband's financial success and their comfortable lifestyle, she often felt empty and uncertain about their direction. "You seem so confident in your choices," she said, as our conversation began to wind down. "Even when people question or criticize them, you maintain this sense of purpose that I envy. How do you do that? How do you stay grounded when the world tells you that you should want different things?" Her question touched something deep in my understanding of the journey that had brought me to this point. Years of defending my choices had forced me to articulate why they mattered, to develop conviction that went beyond external validation. Military life had taught me resilience and adaptability, but more importantly, it had shown me what authentic partnership looked like when two people shared fundamental values about service and contribution. I think it comes from knowing that what David and I do matters beyond our personal satisfaction, I told her. When he deploys, it's not just about advancing his career, it's about protecting people and supporting missions that contribute to global stability. When I work with military families, it's not just volunteer work, it's building resilience in communities that face unique challenges. Amanda nodded thoughtfully, her expression suggesting she was processing ideas that challenged assumptions she'd held for years. Ryan's promotion feels hollow now, she admitted. Don't get me wrong, I'm proud of his accomplishments. But after hearing David talk about purpose and service, climbing corporate ladders seems less meaningful than it used to. As she prepared to leave, Amanda surprised me with an embrace that felt genuinely affectionate rather than socially obligatory. Thank you for letting me see your life more clearly, she said. I have a lot to think about, and probably some changes to make in how Ryan and I approach our future. That evening, as David and I prepared dinner together in our small kitchen, I reflected on the transformation that had occurred in just 5 days. The family gathering that had begun with public humiliation had somehow catalyzed conversations and realizations that might never have happened otherwise. People who had dismissed our choices for years were suddenly seeking to understand them, questioning their own assumptions about success and fulfillment. Do you think this will last? I asked David as we sat down to eat at our small dining table, the baby moving actively in response to the aroma of his carefully prepared meal. Or will everyone go back to their old perspectives once the novelty wears off? David considered the question while cutting his chicken, his approach to serious topics always thoughtful and measured. Some of it will stick, he said finally. Your father seems genuinely interested in understanding military operations, which suggests his change in perspective has intellectual foundation rather than just emotional reaction. Amanda's questions about values and parenting indicate she's been thinking about these issues longer than just since my speech. He paused to take a bite before continuing, but honestly, Sarah, it doesn't matter whether their new understanding is permanent or temporary. What matters is that you've been reminded of something you already knew. Your choices have value and meaning that exist independently of other people's opinions. The baby kicked strongly against my ribs, as if agreeing with its father's assessment, and I placed my hand over the movement with growing sense of confidence about the family we were creating. This child would grow up understanding that success could be measured in service rather than salary, in contribution rather than consumption, in integrity rather than accumulation. Saturday morning brought a phone call that would further cement the changes initiated by David's speech. Captain Elena Rodriguez, David's colleague and friend, called to invite us to a base barbecue the following weekend. I heard about what happened at your family dinner, she said with characteristic directness. Word gets around fast in our community, and everyone's talking about how eloquently David defended military families to civilian critics. The base community had always been supportive, but I sensed something different in Elena's tone, a recognition that our experience represented challenges many military families faced when interacting with civilian relatives and friends who didn't understand their lifestyle choices. David's willingness to articulate the value and significance of military service had apparently resonated throughout our community. Several spouses have asked me to tell you how much they appreciated hearing about someone finally explaining what we do and why it matters, Elena continued. Too many of us have sat through family gatherings feeling like we have to justify or apologize for our choices. It's refreshing to hear about someone turning the tables and making civilians question their assumptions. The conversation reminded me that while my family's newfound understanding was personally gratifying, the broader issue of military families feeling undervalued by civilian society was something many of us faced regularly. David's speech had been specific to our situation, but its impact suggested hunger for better communication between military and civilian communities about the realities of service life. The following Tuesday marked 6 months into my pregnancy, and Dr. Martinez scheduled our routine ultrasound at the base medical facility. David arranged his morning meetings to accompany me, a small gesture that meant everything in a career where personal time often yielded to operational demands. The medical center buzzed with its usual activity, active duty personnel, managing everything from routine checkups to deployment physicals, family members navigating the organized chaos of military healthcare. As we waited in the obstetrics wing, I noticed how different this environment felt from the civilian medical practices I'd visited during previous assignments. Here, pregnant spouses shared common experiences of deployment separations and frequent relocations, creating an immediate bond that transcended typical small talk. The woman sitting across from us was managing her third pregnancy while her husband deployed to Germany. The couple next to David discussed coordinating their baby's delivery with his upcoming assignment to Japan. Sarah Mitchell, a cheerful technician, appeared with a clipboard, leading us into the dimly lit ultrasound room where the familiar equipment waited. David settled into the chair beside the examination table, his presence calming even in situations where his military expertise offered no advantage. Pregnancy and parenthood represented new territory for both of us, requiring different kinds of courage than what his training had provided. The technician squirted warm gel across my exposed belly and began moving the ultrasound wand with practiced precision. Immediately, our baby appeared on the monitor, significantly larger and more defined than during our previous appointment 3 months earlier. Tiny fingers flexed and released, feet kicked against the confines of my womb, and facial features had developed enough clarity to suggest personality traits neither of us could yet identify. "Everything looks perfect," the technician announced cheerfully. "Strong heartbeat, appropriate growth measurements, active movement. Would you like to know the gender?" David and I exchanged glances, a silent communication developed over years of shared decisions about timing and revelation. We discussed this moment extensively, weighing the advantages of preparation against the joy of surprise, practical considerations against romantic idealism about discovering our baby's identity during delivery. "We'd like to wait," I said, speaking for both of us as David nodded agreement. "We want to be surprised." The technician smiled knowingly, apparently accustomed to couples making this choice despite the convenience of advanced planning. "Perfectly understandable. I'll make sure the information doesn't accidentally slip into your conversation. The baby's positioned in a way that makes gender pretty obvious right now, so I'll be careful about camera angles." As she continued the examination, capturing images for our medical records and printing photos for our personal collection, I watched David's face in the monitor's glow. His expression combined wonder and protective intensity, the same focus he brought to mission planning but softened by emotions that had nothing to do with strategic objectives. This was our child, the culmination of everything we'd built together, the future we'd chosen to create despite family skepticism about our direction. "There's something else you should see," the technician said, adjusting her equipment to capture a different angle. "Your baby's sucking its thumb. That's a sign of healthy development and self-soothing behavior. Some babies continue this habit after birth, which can actually help with sleep patterns." The image on screen showed our child with its tiny thumb positioned perfectly in its mouth, a gesture so fundamentally human and innocent that both David and I felt tears threatening. This little person was already developing personality traits and comfort behaviors, already becoming someone unique and individual despite remaining months away from our first meeting. The appointment concluded with printed photos and updated medical information, reassurance that our pregnancy was progressing normally, and our baby was developing exactly as expected. As we left the medical center, David carefully tucked the ultrasound images into his uniform pocket, treating them with the same precision he applied to important documents and mission briefings. "Lunch at the commissary," he suggested, knowing that pregnancy had made me particular about food timing, and that the base's main shopping facility offered familiar options that wouldn't trigger my increasingly sensitive stomach. The commissary represented another aspect of military life that civilian family members often misunderstood, viewing it as a minor perk rather than recognizing how it contributed to community cohesion and family support. Inside the commissary, we navigated aisles that served families from dozens of countries and every branch of military service. Children spoke in multiple languages, while their parents compared prices on international foods unavailable in typical American grocery stores. Teenagers helped elderly military retirees reach high shelves, spontaneous assistance that reflected values of respect and service embedded in military culture. Our shopping cart filled with items for the baby's room, practical purchases that balanced preparation with our modest budget. We decided against elaborate nursery themes or expensive furniture, choosing instead functional items that could travel with us through future assignments. Military families learned early that mobility mattered more than permanence, that relationships and values traveled better than possessions. At the checkout, the cashier noticed David's rank insignia and thanked him for his service with genuine appreciation rather than reflexive politeness. She mentioned her son's recent deployment to Africa, sharing the mixture of pride and worry that military families understood intimately. These casual connections reminded me why base communities felt like extended families, united by shared experiences and mutual support.
That afternoon brought a phone call from my mother, her voice carrying excitement I hadn't heard since Ryan's promotion announcement. "Sarah, I've been doing research about military spouse employment and volunteer opportunities. I had no idea about the challenges you face with career continuity and professional development. I'd like to help if you're interested." Her offer surprised me with its specificity and apparent sincerity. Over the past week, my mother had clearly invested significant time in understanding military life, rather than simply accepting David's explanation and moving forward. She'd discovered statistics about military spouse unemployment, learned about professional networking challenges created by frequent relocations, and identified ways her real estate experience might translate into assistance. "I've been thinking about your situation," she continued, "and I wonder if there are ways to leverage technology for career development that don't require geographical stability. Real estate has become increasingly digital, and many of the skills transfer across state lines. Would you be interested in exploring opportunities that could grow with you through assignments?" The conversation represented such a departure from our previous interactions that I struggled to process her genuine interest in solving problems I'd been managing independently for years. She'd moved beyond simply acknowledging the validity of my choices to actively seeking ways to support them, treating my challenges as puzzles worthy of her professional expertise. We arranged to meet the following day for detailed discussion about career possibilities that could accommodate military life's demands. For the first time since marrying David, I felt like my mother was approaching our relationship as an adult partnership, rather than a concerned parent, managing a wayward child's questionable decisions. Wednesday evening brought another unexpected visitor, when my father appeared at our door with a bottle of wine, and what appeared to be genuine nervousness about the social call. Military families were accustomed to spontaneous visits from neighbors and colleagues, but my father had never dropped by unannounced, preferring scheduled meetings and formal occasions. "I brought something for after the baby arrives," he said, offering the wine with uncharacteristic awkwardness. "I realize I should have made more effort to understand what you and David do, and I'm hoping we can start fresh with better communication." David invited him in, offering coffee and settling into conversation with the patience that characterized his approach to building relationships across cultural and generational differences. My father's legal background had prepared him for complex negotiations and strategic thinking, qualities that aligned surprisingly well with military planning and problem-solving approaches. "I've been researching military logistics and procurement law," my father explained, "and I'm impressed by the legal complexity involved in modern military operations. David, your responsibilities for contract management and regulatory compliance exceed what most corporate executives handle, yet you're doing it in operational environments with additional security and safety constraints." The conversation that followed revealed genuine intellectual curiosity about military operations, my father asking detailed questions about David's work that demonstrated serious research and thoughtful preparation. He'd moved beyond polite interest to professional respect, recognizing parallels between his corporate law experience and the legal challenges inherent in military leadership. "I'm wondering," my father continued, "whether there might be opportunities for collaboration between military legal operations and civilian expertise. I'd be honored to contribute to any initiatives where my experience might be useful, whether through formal consultation or informal advice." David's response reflected both surprise and appreciation for the offer. Throughout our marriage, my father had maintained polite distance from David's career, treating it as something respectable but ultimately foreign to his understanding. This sudden interest in finding ways to contribute represented a fundamental shift in how he viewed military service and its relationship to civilian professional expertise. As the evening progressed, I watched my father and husband discover common ground in their approaches to leadership, problem-solving, and strategic thinking. Despite their different environments and objectives, both men had built careers on careful analysis, clear communication, and ethical decision-making. The professional respect that emerged during their conversation laid foundation for personal relationship that had been missing throughout our marriage. Thursday brought news that would further validate the changes occurring within our extended family. Ryan called to announce that he and Amanda had decided to volunteer with a veterans support organization in Denver, offering technology consulting services to help disabled veterans develop business skills and entrepreneurial opportunities. "We've been talking about what David said," Ryan explained, "about service and contributing to something larger than personal achievement. Amanda and I realized we've been pretty focused on ourselves and our own success without thinking about how we might help others or give back to the community." His decision represented more than casual charity work or social networking disguised as volunteerism. Ryan had committed significant time and expertise to addressing real challenges faced by veterans transitioning to civilian careers, using his technology background to solve problems that required both technical knowledge and genuine understanding of service member experiences. I have to admit, Ryan continued, I never really thought about what happens to people after they leave the military. I assumed everyone just found civilian jobs and moved on. Learning about the challenges veterans face with career transition and small business development has opened my eyes to things I never considered. The conversation revealed that David's speech had prompted Ryan to question not just his assumptions about military families, but his broader understanding of social responsibility and community contribution. His volunteer commitment represented genuine change rather than superficial gesture, a willingness to invest time and energy in causes that mattered beyond his personal advancement. Friday afternoon brought the most significant development since David's speech at Ryan's dinner. Colonel Patricia Hayes, David's commanding officer, requested a meeting to discuss his recent public advocacy for military families and its impact on civilian-military relations in the local community. I accompanied David to the base for the meeting, uncertain whether his speech had created complications or opportunities within his professional environment. Military careers required careful balance between personal convictions and institutional priorities, and public statements could sometimes create unintended consequences for advancement or assignment opportunities. Colonel Hayes received us in her office, which displayed the awards and commendations earned over 25 years of distinguished service. Her reputation for fairness and strategic thinking had earned respect throughout the base, and her feedback on David's actions would significantly influence how we processed the week's events. Colonel Mitchell, she began with characteristic directness, I've been hearing about your remarks at a civilian gathering last weekend. Several community leaders have contacted me with questions about military family support programs and opportunities for civilian participation in base activities. My heart sank, fearing that David's passionate defense of our lifestyle had somehow violated protocol or created diplomatic complications with local civilian leadership. Military spouses learn to worry about how their actions might affect their husbands' careers, and I wondered whether my family's public forum had created problems for David's professional standing. I want you to know, Colonel Hayes continued, that your articulation of military family contributions and challenges has generated exactly the kind of civilian engagement we've been hoping to achieve through our community outreach initiatives. The mayor's office has inquired about establishing formal partnerships between military and civilian volunteer organizations. Relief flooded through me as I realized David's speech had created opportunities rather than complications. His willingness to explain military life to civilian audiences aligned perfectly with institutional goals for improving community relations and public understanding of military service. More importantly, Colonel Hayes added, your defense of military family values and contributions reflects exactly the kind of leadership we need from senior officers. The ability to communicate effectively with civilian audiences about military culture and priorities is increasingly important as we work to maintain public support for defense initiatives. The meeting concluded with Colonel Hayes assigning David to lead a new community engagement program designed to improve civilian understanding of military operations and family life. His speech at Ryan's dinner had demonstrated exactly the communication skills and cultural awareness needed for such initiatives, transforming what began as personal family drama into professional opportunity. As we left her office, David's expression combined satisfaction with renewed purpose. His instinctive defense of our family's choices had somehow aligned perfectly with broader military objectives for community relations and public education. The personal had become professional in ways that validated both his individual convictions and his institutional contributions. That evening, as we prepared dinner in our small kitchen, while the baby moved actively in response to the day's excitement, I reflected on the remarkable transformation that had occurred in just 1 week. A family gathering intended to celebrate Ryan's professional success had somehow catalyzed changes that extended far beyond our immediate relationships. Do you think we would have reached this point eventually? I asked David as we sat down to eat, our conversation necessarily interrupted by frequent baby kicks that demanded attention and response, or did Ryan's speech create something that wouldn't have happened otherwise? David considered the question, while cutting his vegetables, his approach to complex analysis, always systematic and thorough. I think the foundation was always there, he said finally. Your family loves you, even if they didn't understand your choices. But sometimes it takes a catalyst to force conversations that should have happened years ago. Ryan's mockery created the opening for me to explain what our life actually involves. The baby delivered a particularly strong kick that made me gasp, and David immediately reached across to feel the movement that had caught my attention. His face softened in the way it always did when confronted with tangible evidence of our growing family, wonder mixing with protective determination that reminded me why I'd chosen this life and this partner. "This little one's going to grow up in a family that understands its own worth," David said quietly, his hand moving gently across my belly as our child responded to his voice with increased activity. "They won't need to defend their values to people who don't share them, because they'll be confident in what those values mean." 3 weeks after David's speech, life had settled into a new rhythm that reflected the subtle but profound changes in our family relationships. The baby's movements had become stronger and more frequent, creating a constant reminder of the future we were building together. Morning sickness had finally subsided, replaced by the energy and appetite that characterized the second trimester, allowing me to focus on preparing for parenthood while managing the volunteer responsibilities that had gained new respect from my family. The Family Readiness Group meeting that Thursday evening drew a larger crowd than usual, including several new faces who'd heard about our programs through recent community outreach efforts. Captain Elena Rodriguez had been instrumental in expanding our activities beyond traditional support services, incorporating educational components that helped civilian community members understand military life while providing practical assistance to military families. "Sarah, I'd like you to present the Emergency Preparedness Workshop," Elena announced as we reviewed the evening's agenda. "Your experience coordinating support during the Johnson family's medical crisis last month demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership civilian volunteers need to see."
The Johnson situation had tested every aspect of our support network when Staff Sergeant Johnson suffered a training accident that required emergency surgery and extended hospitalization. His wife Maria, 7 months pregnant with their second child, had needed immediate assistance with childcare, transportation, and household management while dealing with medical uncertainty and financial concerns. Our response had involved 12 military families and 6 civilian volunteers coordinating everything from meal preparation to pet care to emotional support for their 4-year-old daughter. The efficiency and compassion of our community's response had impressed hospital staff and drawn attention from local media, highlighting the resilience and mutual support that characterized military communities. As I addressed the group that evening, explaining our crisis response protocols and volunteer coordination systems, I noticed several civilian attendees taking detailed notes and asking sophisticated questions about organizational structure and resource allocation. These weren't casual observers but professionals who recognized effective nonprofit management and wanted to understand how military communities achieve such comprehensive family support. "The key to our effectiveness," I explained, "is prevention through relationship building. We don't wait for crises to develop connections with families. Every new assignment begins with welcome visits, regular social activities, and informal check-ins that create trust before emergencies arise." One civilian volunteer, a social worker named Patricia, raised her hand to ask about training requirements for crisis response. "In my professional work, we have extensive protocols for emergency intervention. How do military spouses develop these skills without formal social services background?" Her question highlighted something I'd never fully appreciated about my own development over 5 years of military life. Through necessity and community culture, I'd acquired crisis management skills, organizational abilities, and emotional support techniques that paralleled professional social work training. Military spouses learned these competencies through experience and mentorship rather than academic study, but the practical application often exceeded what civilian professionals achieved in controlled environments. "Military life teaches crisis management through constant practice," I answered. "Deployments, relocations, emergency exercises, and operational demands create ongoing situations where families must adapt quickly and support each other effectively. We develop these skills because our community's well-being depends on them." After the meeting, Patricia approached me with genuine enthusiasm about expanding collaboration between military family support programs and civilian social services. "I've worked in family crisis intervention for 8 years," she said, "and I'm impressed by the comprehensive approach your community takes to prevention and response. Many civilian organizations could learn from your methods." Her comment reminded me of David's observation that military families often possessed skills and knowledge that civilian communities needed but rarely accessed. Our geographic mobility and security clearance requirements sometimes created barriers to sharing expertise with broader populations who could benefit from military approaches to problem-solving and community building. The drive home from the base passed through Colorado Springs neighborhoods where civilian families lived lives that intersected only occasionally with military culture. Street lights illuminated suburban developments where children played in yards without understanding that their security depended on service members training just miles away. The separation between military and civilian communities was often geographic as well as cultural, creating mutual ignorance that David's speech had begun to address. Friday morning brought a phone call from Amanda, her voice carrying excitement that had become increasingly common as she discovered new perspectives on career and contribution. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind, but I shared some information about your volunteer work with colleagues at the nonprofit where Ryan and I have been volunteering. They're very interested in learning more about military family support programs." Her call led to an unexpected invitation to speak at a regional conference on family support services, addressing civilian professionals who worked with crisis intervention, community development, and nonprofit management. The conference organizers wanted military spouse perspectives on building resilient communities and managing volunteer programs in high-stress environments. "I never imagined that what you do would be relevant to our professional development," Amanda continued. The conference invitation arrived on official letterhead from the Mountain West Coalition for Family Services, requesting my participation as a keynote speaker for their annual symposium on community resilience and crisis management. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the conference director, had heard about our military family support programs through Amanda's networking connections and wanted to explore how civilian organizations could adapt military community strategies for their own crisis response initiatives. "Military families face unique challenges that require innovative solutions," Dr. Martinez explained during our preliminary phone conversation. "From what we've learned about your programs, military communities have developed approaches to family support that exceed what many civilian organizations achieve with significantly larger budgets and professional staff." The recognition felt surreal after years of having my volunteer work dismissed as casual community involvement rather than serious organizational leadership. Civilian professionals were suddenly viewing military spouse contributions as expertise worthy of formal presentation at academic and professional conferences, a perspective that challenged everything my family had believed about the value of military life. As I prepared for the presentation, I began documenting the systems and strategies that military families used instinctively but had never formally analyzed. Crisis response protocols that seemed natural within military communities revealed sophisticated organizational principles when examined through professional development frameworks. What we accomplished through informal networks and volunteer coordination represented complex project management and community organizing that would impress corporate executives and nonprofit administrators. The baby's movements intensified as my presentation date approached, responding to my increased stress and excitement with kicks and rolls that made concentration challenging. At 7 months pregnant, I was entering the phase where physical discomfort competed with mental energy, requiring careful balance between preparation demands and pregnancy limitations. David had taken leave time to accompany me to Denver for the conference, understanding that this opportunity represented validation of contributions he'd been defending since our marriage began. The morning of the conference, I stood before a mirror in our hotel room, adjusting a maternity dress that managed to look professional despite accommodating my expanding belly. The baby seemed unusually active, perhaps responding to my nervous energy about addressing an audience of civilian professionals who would evaluate military community approaches through academic and theoretical frameworks rather than practical experience. "You're going to do brilliantly," David assured me, straightening his civilian suit with the same precision he applied to military uniforms. His presence provided stability and confidence, reminding me that this presentation represented an opportunity to bridge understanding between military and civilian communities rather than a test of my individual capabilities. The conference venue buzzed with activity as social workers, nonprofit administrators, community organizers, and family service professionals gathered for sessions on trauma-informed care, community organizing, and crisis intervention strategies. Name tags identified attendees from dozens of organizations across 5 states, representing thousands of families who could potentially benefit from improved community support approaches. Dr. Martinez introduced me to the audience of nearly 200 professionals, explaining my background in military family support and the innovative programs that had drawn national attention to Peterson Air Force Base community initiatives. As I approached the podium, the baby delivered a particularly strong kick that momentarily took my breath away, a reminder that this little person was already participating in advocacy for military families. "Good morning," I began, placing my hands on my belly as our child continued moving. "I'm speaking to you today not just as a military spouse and community volunteer, but as someone who's about to bring a new generation into a lifestyle that civilian communities often misunderstand or undervalue.
The presentation that followed drew on 5 years of experience managing family crises, coordinating volunteer networks, and building resilience in communities that faced deployment separations, emergency relocations, and operational uncertainties. I outlined specific protocols for crisis response, volunteer training systems, and preventive relationship building that enabled military communities to support families through challenges that would overwhelm less organized civilian neighborhoods. Military families don't have the luxury of learning crisis management through trial and error, I explained to the attentive audience. Deployments, emergency assignments, and operational demands create situations where effective family support can determine whether children thrive or struggle, whether marriages survive or fail, whether communities remain strong or fragment under pressure. Questions from the audience revealed genuine interest in adapting military community strategies for civilian applications. A nonprofit director from Utah asked about volunteer recruitment and retention in high turnover environments. A social worker from Wyoming wanted to understand how military communities maintain support networks across geographical distances. A family services coordinator from Montana inquired about integrating crisis response training into existing community programs. Each question highlighted aspects of military life that I'd learned to manage instinctively but had never analyzed systematically. The audience's professional perspective helped me recognize that skills I'd developed through necessity represented valuable expertise that could benefit civilian families facing their own versions of crisis and uncertainty. During the lunch break, I was approached by Janet Williams, director of a statewide family crisis network serving rural Colorado communities. "Sarah, your presentation has given me ideas for addressing challenges we've struggled with for years. Rural families face geographic isolation and limited resources that create vulnerabilities similar to what military families experience during deployment."
Practical applications. My pregnancy timeline created urgency about completing current projects before maternity leave, but also generated discussions about expanding consulting support after the baby's arrival through modified schedules and remote work arrangements. That afternoon brought a visit from Amanda, whose own volunteer work with veteran support programs had evolved into part-time employment with a nonprofit organization serving transitioning military personnel. Her transformation from corporate wife, focused on social status, to community advocate addressing real social problems represented one of the most significant changes catalyzed by David's speech weeks earlier. "I never imagined how satisfying it would be to work on problems that actually matter," Amanda reflected as we shared tea in my kitchen, the baby responding to our conversation with increased movement that had become routine during social visits. "Ryan's corporate success feels less important now that we understand how much work needs to be done helping people who've served our country." Her comment highlighted a broader pattern I'd observed among family members and friends who'd been exposed to military community values and service-oriented thinking. People who'd previously measured success through personal advancement and material accumulation were discovering fulfillment in contribution and community impact that civilian careers rarely provided. "Ryan's been talking about taking a sabbatical from his tech job to develop technology solutions for veteran employment programs," Amanda continued. "He's discovered that his programming skills could address real problems rather than just generating profit for his company." Her update reflected changes that extended beyond tolerance for different lifestyle choices into active pursuit of service and contribution as primary career motivations. Ryan and Amanda were restructuring their priorities around community impact rather than personal advancement, a transformation that would have seemed impossible before David's explanation of military family values. Thursday morning brought news that would reshape our immediate future when David received notification of his next assignment to Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington state, scheduled for late spring after our baby's arrival. Military families expected periodic relocations, but timing created questions about how to manage consulting work, family support responsibilities, and new parenthood while coordinating a cross-country move. "The assignment includes opportunities for expanded community outreach programs," David explained as we reviewed relocation timelines and logistical requirements. Lewis McChord has been selected as a pilot base for military-civilian partnership initiatives based on the success we've achieved here in Colorado Springs. His new position would involve leading community engagement programs that extended military family support approaches into civilian communities across the Pacific Northwest, building on work we'd started in Colorado while expanding scope and impact. The assignment represented professional advancement that recognized his expertise in civilian-military relations while creating opportunities for my consulting work to grow alongside his institutional responsibilities. The relocation timeline allowed for completing current consulting projects before moving, with potential for remote work continuation and expanded consulting opportunities in our new location. Washington State's progressive approach to family services and community organizing created favorable environment for military spouse professional development and consulting practice expansion. Friday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor when Colonel Hayes arrived at our home for informal discussion about my consulting work and its relationship to base community programs. Her visit reflected institutional recognition that military spouse expertise had value beyond volunteer coordination, acknowledging professional contributions that could enhance official military family support initiatives. Your consulting success and the positive attention it's generated for military family programs has created opportunities for formal collaboration between your private consulting practice and military family services. Colonel Hayes explained as we settled in our living room, the baby responding to her authoritative voice with movement that suggested recognition of military leadership presence. Her proposal involved developing formal partnerships between my consulting practice and military family service programs, creating opportunities for military spouse expertise to contribute to institutional objectives while maintaining independent professional development. The arrangement would provide military communities with access to proven expertise while supporting military spouse career advancement and professional recognition. We're proposing to contract with your consulting practice for family program development and volunteer training across multiple installations, Colonel Hayes continued. This would provide stable income and professional advancement while contributing to military family welfare on a broader scale than individual base programs can achieve. The opportunity represented validation that military spouse contributions had institutional value worthy of formal recognition and compensation. My volunteer experience was evolving into professional expertise that could influence military family support policy and program development across the entire service branch. That evening, as David and I discussed the implications of his new assignment and my consulting opportunities, the baby's movements intensified in response to our excited conversation about future possibilities. At 8 months pregnant, I was experiencing the physical limitations and emotional anticipation that characterized the final weeks before delivery, balancing professional planning with preparation for parenthood. Lewis McCord's location near Seattle creates opportunities for consulting expansion into urban family services and technology sector community programs, David observed. His strategic thinking apparent as he analyzed how geographic relocation could enhance rather than complicate our professional development. Washington State's progressive policies and strong nonprofit sector could provide ideal environment for consulting practice growth. His analysis reflected the military planning mindset that had guided our marriage through 5 years of assignments and challenges, approaching change as opportunity for advancement rather than disruption to established patterns. Military families learn to view relocation as professional development and personal growth rather than inconvenience or limitation. Saturday brought a phone call from my mother, whose real estate expertise had evolved into active support for my consulting practice development and professional advancement. Her transformation from skeptical parent questioning my choices to enthusiastic advocate promoting my expertise represented one of the most profound changes resulting from David's speech and its aftermath. Sarah, I've been researching family services programs in Washington State, and there are numerous opportunities for consulting expansion in your new location, she reported with enthusiasm that had been entirely absent from previous conversations about my career prospects. Seattle's nonprofit sector and progressive government funding could provide excellent market for military spouse expertise. Her research reflected genuine investment in my professional success rather than polite interest in activities she didn't understand or value. My mother had become active advocate for my consulting practice, using her professional networks and business development expertise to identify opportunities and potential partnerships. I've also been talking with some colleagues about military spouse employment challenges and the expertise you've developed through community service, she continued. Several business leaders have expressed interest in learning more about military family management approaches and their applications in corporate settings. Her networking on my behalf created possibilities for consulting expansion beyond family services into corporate leadership development and organizational management, areas where military community approaches could enhance civilian business effectiveness and employee satisfaction. Sunday's family dinner at my parents' house reflected the complete transformation in family dynamics that had occurred since Ryan's mocking speech just 2 months earlier. Instead of defending my lifestyle choices or deflecting dismissive comments about military life, I found myself at the center of enthusiastic discussion about professional achievements and future opportunities that my family actively supported and promoted. Ryan's volunteer work with veteran employment programs had evolved into serious consideration of career change from corporate technology development to nonprofit sector leadership. A transformation that would have seemed impossible before his exposure to military community values and service-oriented thinking. I've been offered a position as technology director for a regional veterans support organization, Ryan announced during dinner, his voice carrying excitement about professional change that prioritized impact over income. The salary's significantly lower than my corporate position, but the work involves developing solutions for problems that actually matter. His career transition reflected changes that extended throughout our extended family as exposure to military values influenced priority assessment and professional decision-making. People who'd previously measured success through financial achievement and social status were discovering fulfillment in contribution and community service that corporate careers rarely provided. Amanda's own evolution from corporate wife to nonprofit professional had accelerated since her volunteer work began, leading to employment opportunities that utilized her organizational skills and educational background, while serving populations she'd never previously considered. I'm being considered for program director position at the Veterans Transition Center, she shared with pride that contrasted sharply with her previous focus on social events and material acquisition. My parents' support had evolved beyond acceptance of my choices into active promotion of my expertise and professional development, with my father offering legal services for consulting practice formalization and my mother providing business development networking and strategic planning assistance. As the evening concluded and we prepared to return to base housing, my father surprised me with a formal proposal that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Sarah, I'd like to propose establishing a family foundation focused on military family support and veteran transition programs. Your consulting expertise and David's institutional knowledge could guide foundation priorities while creating funding sources for the programs you're developing. His proposal represented investment in causes he'd never previously understood or valued, acknowledging that military family contributions warranted philanthropic support and institutional development. The foundation concept would formalize family commitment to military community support while providing resources for consulting practice expansion and program development. That night, as David and I settled into our bedroom with the baby moving actively in response to the day's excitement and anticipation, I reflected on the extraordinary transformation that had occurred in such a brief period. David's instinctive defense of our family's worth had somehow catalyzed changes that extended far beyond our immediate relationships, creating opportunities for professional advancement and community contribution that neither of us had anticipated. Our child's going to grow up in a family that understands service and contribution, David said softly, his hand moving across my belly as our baby responded to his voice with increased movement. They'll never have to defend their values or justify their choices because they'll be surrounded by people who understand what really matters. The baby delivered a particularly strong kick that made me gasp, and David's face reflected the wonder and protective determination that had characterized his response to pregnancy from the beginning. This little one's already part of a family legacy that values purpose over profit, contribution over consumption, integrity over image. As I drifted toward sleep that night, feeling our child's movement and David's protective presence, I understood that the humiliation at Ryan's dinner had become catalyst for transformation that would influence our family for generations. Our child would inherit not just our individual values but the broader family understanding and support that had emerged from David's courageous defense of military life and community service. 3 months later, I stood in the nursery of our new home at Joint Base Lewis McChord, holding our daughter Emma Grace Mitchell while spring rain painted patterns on the windows overlooking Puget Sound. At 6 weeks old, she possessed David's steady gaze and what appeared to be my stubborn determination, evident in her refusal to sleep during daylight hours and her insistence on being held during important phone calls. The consulting practice had seamlessly transitioned to our new location, with remote work capabilities allowing continuation of Colorado projects while Washington state opportunities exceeded every projection I'd developed during pregnancy planning. The Pacific Northwest's progressive approach to family services and robust nonprofit sector created ideal environment for military spouse expertise application, generating consulting requests that required careful scheduling around new motherhood demands.
David's community outreach position at Lewis McChord involved leading regional military-civilian partnership initiatives that built on our Colorado Springs success while expanding scope to serve larger populations across multiple installations. His work had gained national attention within military family services, leading to speaking engagements and policy consultation opportunities that validated his expertise in civilian-military relations. Emma stirred in my arms as the phone rang with my scheduled call from Dr. Martinez, whose Family Services Coalition had grown from regional initiative to statewide programs serving rural communities across the Mountain West. The success of military-style volunteer coordination and crisis response protocols had convinced state governments to invest in community organizing approaches rather than relying solely on traditional social services. Sarah, the latest evaluation reports show sustained improvement in family outcome measures across all pilot communities. Dr. Martinez reported with satisfaction that reflected months of collaborative effort. Counties implementing your military community strategies are demonstrating crisis response effectiveness that exceeds what professional social service agencies achieve with significantly larger budgets. Her update included funding announcements for program expansion into additional states, creating consulting opportunities that would extend military spouse expertise application across broader geographic areas while maintaining flexibility for military family relocation demands. The work had evolved beyond individual consulting projects into systematic change that would influence family support approaches throughout the region. Emma's fussing interrupted the call as feeding time approached with the precision that had characterized her schedule since birth. New motherhood required constant adjustment between professional responsibilities and infant care demands, but military family flexibility and David's supportive partnership made the balance manageable despite occasional challenges. That afternoon brought a visit from my parents who'd flown to Washington to meet their granddaughter and observe the life we'd built in our new location. Their transformation from skeptical critics of our choices to enthusiastic supporters of our professional achievements had deepened since Emma's birth, as they witnessed military community support for new families and understood the comprehensive nature of military family welfare systems. Sarah, the base child care resources and family support programs here are more comprehensive than anything available in civilian communities, my mother observed as we toured the family services facilities that would support us through David's assignment. I had no idea military installations provided such extensive support for family welfare and professional development. Her comment reflected continuing education about military life that had begun with David's speech and expanded through her involvement in our consulting practice development. My parents had become active advocates for military family programs and veteran support initiatives, using their professional networks and community influence to promote understanding and support for military families. Emma's birth had intensified their investment in our success, transforming theoretical support into practical assistance that included everything from child care during consulting travel to business development networking for practice expansion. Their involvement reflected genuine conversion from dismissive attitudes toward military life to active promotion of military family contributions and needs. David returned from his afternoon meetings with updates about community partnership initiatives that had grown beyond original expectations, involving civilian organizations across Washington state and collaborative programs that served both military and civilian families. His success in building these relationships had generated interest from Pentagon Family Services leadership about developing national models based on Pacific Northwest achievements. The Secretary of Defense's office has requested briefings about our community partnership approaches, David announced as he settled into our living room with Emma immediately reaching for him with the recognition she'd shown since birth. They're considering our programs as models for military-civilian engagement initiatives across all service branches. His professional advancement reflected expertise developed through years of military service combined with natural ability for civilian community relations that had emerged during our Colorado Springs experiences. David's willingness to explain and defend military family values had evolved into institutional leadership that influenced policy development and program implementation beyond individual installations. That evening brought a phone call from Ryan, whose career transition to veteran support services had progressed beyond part-time volunteer work into executive leadership position with regional scope and national connections. His transformation from dismissive corporate achiever to passionate advocate for veteran welfare represented one of the most dramatic changes catalyzed by David's speech months earlier. Sarah, the technology platform we've developed for veteran employment matching has gained attention from federal agencies interested in nationwide implementation. Ryan reported with excitement about work that combined his technical expertise with newfound commitment to service and contribution. Amanda and I are being asked to present our programs to congressional committees considering veteran support legislation. His professional evolution from corporate advancement to public service reflected changes that had occurred throughout our extended family as exposure to military values influenced career decisions and priority assessment. People who'd previously measured success through personal achievement were discovering fulfillment in work that addressed community needs and contributed to social welfare. Amanda's own career development had accelerated through nonprofit leadership roles that utilized her organizational abilities while serving populations she'd never previously considered important. Her work with veteran transition programs had expanded into regional coordination responsibilities that influenced policy development and resource allocation for veteran support services. Friday morning brought news that would reshape our family's future when David received notification of his selection for prestigious fellowship program at the National Defense University, involving graduate study in strategic leadership and community engagement that would influence military family policy development at national levels. The fellowship includes research opportunities focused on military-civilian relations and family support program development, David explained as we reviewed program details and their implications for our family planning. It's essentially recognition that our community partnership work has national significance and policy development potential. The opportunity represented extraordinary professional advancement that validated David's expertise while creating possibilities for my consulting work to influence military family policy through academic research and institutional collaboration. The fellowship location in Washington, D.C., would provide access to policymakers and national organizations while maintaining consulting practice flexibility. Emma's babbling from her bouncy seat seemed to express approval of plans that would expand our professional impact while maintaining family stability and community connection. Military children adapted to change and relocation with resilience that prepared them for global citizenship and diverse cultural experiences. That weekend brought the most significant validation of our family's journey when we received formal invitation to present our community partnership programs at the White House Conference on Military Family Support, addressing national policymakers and service organization leaders about effective approaches to military-civilian collaboration. The invitation represented recognition that our family's experience defending military life and developing community partnerships had implications for national policy and program development. What had begun with David's instinctive response to family mockery had evolved into expertise that would influence how America supported military families and integrated military communities into broader civilian society. As I prepared presentation materials while Emma napped in her crib, I reflected on the extraordinary trajectory that had brought our family from humiliation at a civilian dinner party to influence at the highest levels of military family policy development. David's courage in defending our choices had catalyzed changes that extended far beyond our immediate relationships, creating opportunities for service and contribution we'd never imagined possible. Sunday's video call with both our families revealed the complete transformation in relationships and priorities that had occurred since Ryan's mocking speech almost a year earlier. Instead of defending our lifestyle choices or seeking approval for decisions that had been questioned and criticized, we found ourselves coordinating family involvement in national initiatives that promoted military family welfare and civilian military understanding. Ryan and Amanda's foundation work with veteran employment programs had gained congressional attention, leading to testimony opportunities and policy consultation that utilized their technology expertise while serving veteran transition needs. Their career evolution from corporate focus to public service reflected values transformation that had influenced their entire approach to professional development and community contribution. My parents' family foundation had formalized support for military family initiatives and veteran transition programs, providing funding and advocacy that promoted military community needs while utilizing their professional networks for program development and policy influence. Their conversion from skeptical critics to passionate advocates represented personal transformation that extended beyond our immediate family into broader community engagement. Your White House presentation represents validation of everything we've learned about military family contributions and their importance to national welfare. His legal expertise now actively supporting military family advocacy rather than questioning our career choices. David's defense of your family's values at Ryan's dinner has somehow evolved into national policy influence and community program development. As our call concluded and I held Emma while David reviewed presentation materials for our Washington, D.C. trip, I understood that our family's journey represented something larger than individual career development or personal relationship improvement. The mockery and humiliation that had seemed devastating at the time had become catalysts for transformation that would influence military family support and civilian military relations for years to come. Emma's content gurgling as she played with her father's uniform buttons reflected the confidence and security that would characterize her childhood in a family that understood its own worth and contributed meaningfully to community welfare. She would grow up knowing that service mattered more than salary, that contribution exceeded consumption, that integrity surpassed image in determining authentic success. That night, as I nursed Emma while David reviewed fellowship program materials that would guide our next chapter, I reflected on the profound truth that had emerged from our family's experience. Sometimes the greatest growth comes from defending what you know to be right, even when others cannot see its value. Sometimes the most important transformations begin with someone having the courage to explain why their choices matter, regardless of who's listening or whether they initially understand. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.